The Purple Line is a community podcast bringing you in-depth conversations with diverse leaders in the public and private sectors. Whether you're a student looking to gather advice or a professional tuning in for valuable resources, our dynamic programming provides inspiration and insights for all ages and backgrounds. I'm Marianne Gomez-Horta, your host of the Purple Line Podcast and the CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. Welcome. Hi, Jorge. How are you?
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, thank you for being part of this, the Purple Line Podcast here. We want to learn a little bit about you, kind of your origin story, and to share with us a little bit about the museum. So for the audience, can you share with us your full name, title, the whole works here?
Sure. My name is Jorge Zamanillo. I'm the founding director of the National Museum of the American Latino, which is part of the Smithsonian.
So, okay, Smithsonian, what does that mean for people that don't know?
The Smithsonian is the largest network of museums in the world, actually. We have 21 museums and a zoo, and we have museums that range from natural sciences to history to fine arts.
Very cool.
A little bit of everything.
So is that the zoo where the pandas are?
Including the zoo where the pandas are, which is a highlight this month.
Yes.
I came back last month, yes.
I love it. So how did you get involved in this? So I'm, kind of doing the homework here and of Cuban heritage from Florida. You studied there. So tell us a little bit about, your college degree and how that got you into this.
Yeah, it's amazing. I never thought I would work in a museum. Growing up, I was always very active in the outdoors and building things and discovering new things I could take apart and now be able to put together back
Did they
together.
ever come back together?
That was a challenge.
Left over.
But it was kind of a sense of discovery, like always looking for new things, right? I was for a while. I was a music major. I played trumpet in high school.
Do you still play the trumpet?
I still play often. I mean, not as often as I'd like to.
Okay.
But I used it to pay for my college. I played in salsa bands and mega bands in Miami at night while I had another job.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's a whole other conversation
So,
for sure.
But I was always missing that kind of sense of discovery, things you lose when you're growing up, right? I tell people all the time, you go through this phase, and sadly, I think it's when you enter like what used to be called junior high, middle school now, and high school, and your interests change, right?
Yeah.
You either get really busy with homework at school, or boyfriend or girlfriend, or sports, or other things, and you kind of lose that sense of discovery you had when you were a kid, right? You start worrying about your grades more, maybe. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, more homework.
More homework. But when I got into the museum field and anthropology and archaeology, I kind of rekindled that interest and that sense of discovery, of uncovering things. And
so you studied archaeology or
I did.
History, or what was the?
So my track was, and I'll go into how I got started in all of this, which is really crazy. When I was 19 years old, I was about to turn 19, and it was a Martin Luther King weekend. And I looked online, and not online, they didn't have online back then. I opened the paper.
I was going to say,
back
really?
in 1988, I opened the paper, and they had like flights DC, like for $79 or something crazy, round trip.
That
the good old days, right?
Not
So I said, I'm going to go to DC. I've never been to Washington, DC. I was in Miami. We didn't go anywhere. Lower income family, except for coming from New York when I was a little kid. We hadn't left Miami. So I decided, why not? It was a long Martin Luther King weekend. I got here the Monday, and I was here, and there was 3 feet of snow, and on that, I remember flying over Potomac. It was all ice, and it was scary. Like, what am I doing here?
Flying in from Miami?
Flying in from Miami.
Like
I was not prepared.
Yeah.
I was wearing jeans and a denim jacket. I saw a photo I show all the time. So I went to one of the vendors in the street, and I bought a scarf and a hat and some big ski gloves, I think they were.
Yeah.
But I spent 3 or 4 days visiting all the museums and all the monuments, and it was free, right? There's no barrier.
Right.
You can walk into all these places, and I got that kind of rekindled that whole sense of, wow, I didn't even know this was here. And you could tell these stories, and you could see exhibitions. One thing I noticed though is I didn't see that story about immigration of Cuban parents or anything really to do with Latinos or Hispanics.
Yeah.
So very little. But I did see the possibilities of uncovering stories, including prehistoric stories and Indian Native American. So when I got back to Miami, I switched my major from music. I had a music scholarship.
That's how you started.
That's how I started.
Oh,
okay. So that's how I started. I started volunteering in an archaeological site.
Okay.
And I got into it, and that's one thing led to another. And for 10 years, I was an archaeologist, and then eventually started working in a museum in 2000.
So what was that switch then from the archaeology? I mean, I guess it is kind of all historical in nature, but
Sure. Well, we were uncovering artifacts and things that were 6,000 years old. Amazing. We were writing history about the people that lived in Florida and the Caribbean before we were there. So we were always finding collections. I was working with collections, and as a collection manager, I was in the field. I was a project manager. I was creating maps. I was doing all these different things. But I always loved museums because when I was still going to school to Miami-Dade College back then, to community college, I had another part-time job at the same museum. I worked 10 years later, and I was doing education. I worked in the front desk and working the security and doing all these little things, odd jobs. So then 10 years later, after I graduated, a position opened up for curator to work with collections and exhibits. So I had a close relationship with the museum already because we would take all our stuff there for their storage and to process. So I applied and I became a curator there in 2000 and eventually became the CEO. The last 6 years I was there were 21 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And just kind of from a different perspective too, is that there's not a lot of Latinos in like the museum business.
There's not.
Right? Yeah. I mean, your contemporaries from across the country are probably not that diverse.
You're right. I think it's probably the initial shock that people get, for instance, when I say I'm switching from music, which is already not a very high paying career. Yeah. And for those of you who don't know,
I'm kind of curious what your parents thought.
Yeah, I was going to say, for you,
music to museo,
to archaeology, imagine your parents' dismay when they say, okay, you're not a doctor or engineer or an attorney, right? Those are all the things you should be doing to, I always say, well, you know what? I'm paying for my school and with my career, with my scholarship. So I'll keep doing this. And, I was making decent money back then, 2 or 3 odd jobs, and went to school. Then I transferred to Florida State University, where I completed my undergrad degree there. And it's amazing because that's, where I really got an opportunity to leave South Florida. Because I got there, and really Tallahassee, Florida, as some people can attest to, is the deep South. It's completely different, especially in the late 80s, early 90s. Okay. So I did get to see the difference but meet so many different people from all over the world and so many different cultures. And that really opened my mind up to the possibilities of what's there.
And so being a state capital for one, and then just any university, I think kind of gives us that perspective that there's other communities, there's different languages, people come from around the world to study here in the United States, whatever university that is. So I know that was my first experience to meeting people from different backgrounds.
I always felt it was also an experience for them. I guarantee you I was the only Latino in my classes and doing archaeology back then. And it was interesting because I met a couple of people, and like a semester later we're doing a field school. We were actually going out every morning and digging on a site, and you really get to know everybody because you're there at 6:30 in the morning waiting for the van, and you're all day with them all day, and then you have classes at night to make up your 15 credits, right? So and someone came up to me and says, "Oh, it's so great to get to know you, Fanny. I always thought you were from the Middle East or Arabia." I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, again, it was just like stereotypes. No, I'm like
closer. I'm like a few hours south.
It's like stereotypes, and they were lifted, and then you get to know these people, and they're lifelong friends, right? Later on, and then it does open those connections.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about where we are now with the Smithsonian, with capturing our stories here in Washington, D.C. It's a big legislative effort. There's a lot of bipartisanship, a lot of negotiating, presenting, research. So here we are in early part of 2025. Where are we in that stage?
Yeah. Well, I call this a journey. And I tell everybody it's not a project that you take on and expect to be done in 1 or 2 years.
True.
Even though you can build probably a high rise or a skyscraper in 5 years, these museums take 10 or 12 years to build. And
that's just to build it.
Just to the process, right? Okay. It's a lot of fundraising. We know these museums that we're building these days will cost over $1 billion, and half of that has to come from private fundraising. So I need to raise over $500 million eventually over this decade. The other half is through appropriations as needed or as possible, right? Because as funding it's not automatic. So we know that's dragged out over that period of time. But the most important thing is the community work that we do. How we go out across the nation to make sure we capture the stories and collect the artifacts, the objects you need.
So what do you do? You just let people know do you partner with other museums too? or different community groups? How do you do that too?
Yeah, well, one thing we're doing is we started doing it already for the past 2 years. We visited over 30 cities, 20 different states, but now we're concentrating on really picking out 2 or 3 cities a year. So, for instance, in May we'll be in Los Angeles. In the summer we'll be in Kansas City. We're picking different places all over. The Needles Conference is going to be there. Right. So we're targeting different regions of the United States, big cities, rural communities, everywhere. And with a concentrated effort to go in there and say, okay, not only we're going to have a conversation or a panel discussion, we're going to have a partnership with a local museum and have families over and the public and have 1,000, 2,000 people there. Then we'll also have a cultivation event, maybe one of the evenings to help raise money. Just 3 or 4 prong way that we.
And anybody can sponsor or contribute, I guess, right? You
definitely,
don't have to be a philanthropist. It doesn't have to be a big company. It could be anyone who's listening, watching, to kind of step in and contribute to this.
Definitely. You know, to get to that big number, you know, you definitely the benchmarks along the way, these milestones. You know, when the museum was created, it was the first one. Created a board. They hired the founding director.
Right.
Hopefully we get site selection approved soon and permission to build in the mall.
Is that a thing for this year too?
That's hopefully we get this year. That'd be the benchmark for this year. Yes. Exactly.
Yes.
And then you have the beautiful renderings, and then you have the architecture and competition, and then you have the groundbreaking. So all these things along the way lead up to that final 5 years, which is actually the construction period. And you'll see the building coming out of the ground, and then we start outfitting the inside with all the beautiful things we found to tell those stories. So that's why it takes 10 or 12 years. So it is a journey.
Wow, that's awesome. You know, so with the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, you know, we're a leadership development organization at the core. Internships are really important. So tell us a little bit about, you know, do you have internship opportunities or just the overall Smithsonian's? How can young future Jorges get involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Smithsonian has internships across many museums, but at the Latino Museum, what we have is we have different ways to get engaged.
Okay.
We have for many years now a Young Ambassadors program. So these are youth that come in and usually straight out of high school, and they don't necessarily have to have an interest in the museum field. It's more about professional development. Okay. We engage with them here for a few weeks, and then they go back to their community and partner with other institutions there. And we have over 500 alumni of all these internships, by the way.
Wow,
that's great. So the other one is the Museum Studies program. We have an undergraduate and a graduate program right now. We also have fellowships. And those students come in here and they spend a couple of months in D.C. and we partner them with other museums and galleries across the mall. And they they learn about curatorial work, exhibit work, marketing, communications, whatever it may be.
They get the full range of all those different
facets. And the amazing thing is this network goes back 30 years of Latino Museum Studies program. And whenever I visit a city in the United States or sometimes other countries, there's always an LMSP intern that was here, a graduate, alumni, and they have that connection. So we're building this pipeline of people that are not only supporters and future philanthropists, but they're really also future employees. We have 3 or 4 alumni of the LMSP program working at the museum and working in other museums in the Smithsonian, at the National Gallery. So that's what's important. And those are always connections we could use to spread the message.
Very cool. So share with us a little bit about, you know, again, kind of going back to Chile and working with young professionals. Who inspired you? Was there someone in particular, a leader, a mentor? Who inspired you to get into what you're doing now?
It's interesting. I don't know if I could pinpoint one person, but I think it goes back to my upbringing. I think it goes back to my upbringing. Many know that, you know, I was born in New York City, in Washington Heights, before it was famous Heights. And the reason for that is because my parents emigrated from Cuba in 1966 in the Freedom Flights. So they got there and they arrived in Miami, were processed, and then headed to New York, like many people, because there weren't enough jobs in Miami at the time in the 60s. Small town back then.
Wow. Yeah, that's true.
Not 3 million people. Yeah. So they go to New York for possibilities, right? There's not enough people. There's not enough jobs in Miami for all the new influx of immigrants coming in.
Did you already have family in Miami?
We had some family. We had 2 uncles in New York already, and my grandfather. Sadly, my mom's family, I mean, both families were devastated by the communism and what happened in Cuba in 1959, and everybody started fleeing. But my mom, on her side, she's one of 8 kids. So 4 kids stayed behind and 4 came to the United States. And 1 parent stayed behind, her mom, and her dad came to the United States. So for the next 30, 40 years, they were perfectly split. It was really hard. But so we had that kind of experience, starting a new life in the United States, starting all over. My mom was raising, 4 kids. My brother was with 2 kids that were born in Cuba, and then my sister and I were born in New York. Big range of ages. And then my dad was an artist. He was a sculptor.
So it's in your blood.
Yeah. So the art is there. So, but imagine, coming to a new country, you're an established artist and sculptor in a country that really, it helps living in Cuba when at the time in the 40s and 50s, statues and monuments and that kind of artwork is popular, right? It's kind of like a European capital of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And then going to New York and trying to struggle, how do you make a living as a struggling artist when there's another 100, 200 living in a couple blocks away, right?
Yeah.
So
you're learning everything else new at the same time.
You're learning everything new. But anyways, by 76, we moved to Miami. They had enough of the cold. They wanted more tropical weather. But so I mostly grew up in South Florida. Yeah, but that experience of learning from other immigrants and people that come to this country, I think that's really what shaped my life and my career. Seeing how we didn't have much, but we always had close-knit family. We always had that love and support, and I saw that in all my friends and other family members, and that really is what encourages you to keep going, right? Trying to make a difference and trying to elevate. Your what are you going to do for a living? What is it you're going to do? Because you want to do better. You want to be able to support yourself and also give back to your family and to your community.
That's awesome. So any words of wisdom for our interns that are thinking about whether they want to go into something like museum or art, whatever that might be, and they have the opportunity, and they're also maybe, first generation immigrants? What's your advice?
Sure. I think it's really to, put your neck out there. You make sure like when I got back from DC and I wanted to be involved in archaeology, I just called the county archaeologist, the local archaeologist in the city of Miami, and I said, do you have any opportunities? And he said, well, you could work they're building a new football stadium in North Miami. It became the Dolphin Stadium, the football stadium. So the Miami Dolphin Stadium today. And there's a big construction site there, and there's a big prehistoric site and a Seminole Indian site from the 1700s. Oh, really? And you can volunteer there. We can't pay you. So I did it. And I said, I changed my schedule around. I took a nighttime job instead. And people thought I was crazy. I started volunteering there. Within a couple of months, I was getting paid. And that same company, I worked for 10 years when I got back from school. Yeah, that's awesome. So it's really about taking that next day, being adventurous and saying, let me try something new. Let me try something else. Get out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And many of my friends I saw were, going to business school, nothing against that, or just doing what was expected of them, right? Doing the 4 years. And I saw that after 4 years, they were not happy. They were, they're like, why did I do this? Now I want to go to graduate school to change my course to study, or I want to go abroad, or I want to do these other things. And from that point that I started volunteering in that archaeological site until today, I kind of knew my course was going to be, right? I kind of charted that path, and I said, I'm going to make sure that I want to do all these things and eventually go back and work in a museum to tell those stories that I did not see at the Smithsonian, and make sure our families and immigrants and Latinos are represented in this institution.
Yeah, but thank you for saying to just go for it. Like, make the phone call, send that email, just give it a shot. Yeah. Right? Just give it a shot. So thank you again, Jorge, for joining us on the CHLI Purple Line. Encourage everyone to look up information about the museum. Follow Jorge on social media as well. And again, muchísimas gracias, Jorge.
Thank you for having me. Gracias.
Thanks for listening to The Purple Line. Follow us on social media at The CHLI, at THECHLI. Thank you for joining us on The Purple Line.